Democratic leaders have blacks chasing their tail like deranged animals.
On Sunday, March 7th, 1965, exactly 56 years ago today, Reverend Hosea Williams and 25-year-old John Lewis walked side by side as they led some 600 black men, women, and children on a march for voting rights from Brown Chapel in Selma, Alabama to the state capitol in Montgomery. Only they never made it to Montgomery. In fact, they were just about a mile into their 54-mile march, just over the Evan Pettus Bridge, when a line of Alabama state troopers advanced on Lewis and the peaceful marchers with billy clubs, tear gas, and horses. The cracks of
It's been 55 years since a Voting Rights Act was passed, but the voting rights of Black Americans is once again coming under attack. A 2013 Supreme Court decision has led to the disenfranchisement of thousands of voters across the country. That decision had a ripple effect, making it more difficult for people in low-income areas to cast their vote.
Let's be clear. 55 blacks have transferred their support from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party based on voters' rights. 55 years ago, this is how the Democratic Party won the support of the black vote.
Well, there's always some friendly competition between sororities, but something and someone have pulled members of the historically black sororities together for an online campaign that's now gone viral. It's the election and vice presidential candidate Kamala Harris, who's a member of one of those organizations. Jennifer Bellum.
Black Greek organizations, when you join, whether it's in college or sometime after, it's a lifetime commitment, and the work and service don't stop after graduation. That's why one woman came up with an idea to get people moving, to get people politically active, and to bring people together.
I accept your nomination for Vice President of the United States of America. Family is my beloved Alpha Kappa Alpha, our Divine Nine, and my HBCU brothers and sisters.
Maisha Land, another member of AKA, wanted to build on that historic moment with the tradition of strolling. So what is that exactly? Members of a Divine Nine organization form a line and move forward using the same dance or motions, hence stroll to the polls.
It was only supposed to be 4 of us, right? 4 or 5 of us. It grew into over 20 women because people were just so excited to participate.
Land owns the Gems of Georgia dance studio in Southwest Atlanta and united her own sorority sisters, along with members of Delta Sigma Theta, Zeta Phi Beta, and Sigma Gamma Rho, in what has become a viral series of images and videos online. People across the country, including celebrities, have shared it. It was even mentioned on The View, a reaction Land didn't expect.
Let's be clear. Whites have used fear, black culture, black spirituality, all to propel themselves to higher positions, especially white liberals of the Democratic Party. They use the stroll to the poll campaign in order to motivate blacks to get up and go and vote. But what did blacks receive in return? We have to understand that this has been an ongoing practice and policy with the Democratic Party. Clinton went as far as to play the saxophone on the Arsenio Hall show in order to make himself more endearing to African-American voters. All the while, Clinton and Joe Biden was putting together the crime bill. So we have to understand how our emotions, our spirituality, and our culture has been weaponized against us as a people who majority voted for the current president, who sided with the president. Black African Americans voted with the Democratic Party larger than any other percentage group in America. But yet, with the president in the highest space in the land, highest office in America, he is silent when it comes to our rights.
Sir, where do you stand? You said last week that this report about migrant families at the border getting payments was garbage.
No, I didn't say that. Let's get it straight. You said everybody coming across the border gets $450,000.
The number was what you had a problem.
The number I was referring to.
Okay.
Now here's the thing.
Sure.
If in fact, because of the outrageous behavior of the last administration, you coming across the border, whether it was legal or illegal, and you lost your child, it's gone. You deserve some kind of compensation, no matter what the circumstance. What that will be, I have no idea. Yes.
DOJ negotiating a settlement.
Biden said he would give basically reparations to the Mexicans who were separated at the border due to the behavior of the last administration. I have a question for Biden. What do he do for Black Americans who have family who have been disrupted for the last 46 administrations? The last 46 presidents, administrations, which have supported the enslavement or the mass incarceration of African-American men, the separation of African-American families. What do you do as reparations for the African-Americans who have been separated by the policies of America since its existence? This is what Black people have to ask yourself when the president who you voted into office is talking about giving reparations to foreigners. Now understand, Blacks have been the biggest supporters of the Democratic Party. In 2020, whites only supported the Democratic Party by 44%. Blacks supported the Democratic Party by 90%. Latinos supported the Democratic Party by 63%. The Asian community supported the Democratic Party by 67% and others by 55%. But if you notice, and I need you to notice this, that he have offered the Dream Path for the Latino community. He has also offered reparations for Latinos separated at the border, and Latinos are leaving the Democratic Party. Mexicans specifically 6%, Republicans, who is that? Dominican Republicans, the Cubans are leaving by 13%. Dominican Republicans are leaving the Democratic Party by 9%. Puerto Ricans minus 9%. Let me get a correction. The Dominicans by 8% and others by 9%. Yet they're being offered Dreamers, the Dreamers program by the Democrats, where they're offered path to citizenship, and they're leaving their support for the Democratic Party. They're being offered reparations for being separated at the borders, and Latinos are leaving the Democratic Party, and Blacks, who are the most loyal to the Democratic Party, is not offered anything for the suffering that we have received throughout America. Let's be clear. Asians only represented 6.1% of Democrat voting bloc in the 2020 election, while Blacks made up 20%, but you had an Asian hate bill passed, but no George Floyd crime bill passed. Clear evidence that your vote is being taken advantage of by the Democratic Party. You have the Latinos who supported the Democratic Party by 12.1%, but you have the Democratic pushing for two policies for the Latino, pushing for them to receive citizenship, and you're pushing for them to receive reparations from separations at the border, while you continue the mass incarceration of African Americans and offer us nothing in return.
You talk in your book about voting, and you talk about you voted for Kamala Harris, and you talked about Biden and not really having any expectations of him as an old white man.
First, let me state this. I believe TOAMIKA Mallory has sincere intentions, but I believe she is very naive about the political arena. It is foolish to support the vice president when you do have no belief in the president's policy. The vice president position is only that of support of the president. So why would you suggest that we squander our vote by giving it to someone who you have no faith in? This shows the naivety of her leadership.
Well, if Senator Kamala Harris rises in the early presidential polls, she's facing increased scrutiny over her record as a prosecutor in California. In 2004, Harris became district attorney of San Francisco. She held the post until 2011, whereupon she became the attorney general of California. We're joined now by Lara Bazelon, a professor at the University of San Francisco School of Law. In January, she wrote a widely read article in the New York Times titled, "Kamala Harris was not a progressive prosecutor." Bazelon wrote, quote, "Time after time, when progressives urged her to embrace criminal justice reforms as a district attorney and then the state's attorney general, Ms. Harris opposed them or stayed silent. Most troubling, Ms. Harris fought tooth and nail to uphold wrongful convictions that had been secured through official misconduct that included evidence tampering, false testimony, and the suppression of crucial information by prosecutors."
I'm questioning, did TOAMIKA Mallory do her homework before deciding to throw her support behind Kamala Harris?
Two things happened in her tenure as DA that I think are worth mentioning. One is that there was a big crime lab scandal whereby there was a lab technician who was using the drugs rather than testing them. And as a result, many, many convictions became tainted. And it turned out that her office had known for months, top attorneys had, and had not disclosed that information to the defense. And when a judge found out, she became quite incensed and wrote an opinion castigating Harris for allowing this to happen. Harris's reaction to that was to try to get the judge disqualified by saying that she had a conflict of interest because her husband was a defense lawyer. That failed, and 600 cases were thrown out. The second piece of her tenure that I think is important that not a lot of people know about is a case involving a man named Jamal Truelove. That case was tried by Linda Allen, who was one of Harris's deputies. And the case against Truelove turned against a single eyewitness, turned on one eyewitness. It was a one eyewitness identification case. He was convicted and sentenced to 50 years to life. And the Court of Appeals threw out that conviction, castigating what Allen had done as gross and egregious prosecutorial misconduct. They said that her closing argument was a yarn made out of whole cloth. Recently, Truelove sued the city of California, the city of San Francisco, and won a $13.1 million judgment.
Now, you've also written about another case, George Gage. Could you talk about that as well?
Yes, and this is what prompted me really to write this piece. It's Harris's record on wrongful convictions. So after Truelove, there was Gage, and there was Johnny Baca, and Daniel Larson, and a man named Jose Luis Diaz. And in these cases, what happened was that Harris was at that point the AG, the top official in the state of California, the top prosecutor. And when these convictions came up, they had been handled by lower DAs, and it was her job to decide whether or not to defend them. In George Gage's case, he had been convicted, again, based on a single witness. It was his stepdaughter, Marion, who accused him of sexually abusing her. And the case turned on Marion's testimony. It turned out after the verdict that the prosecutor had suppressed a lot of material about Marion, including medical records and a note from her own mother saying, "My daughter is a pathological liar who lives her lies." And rather than acknowledge that this really terrible thing had happened, that this prosecutor had held back information that might have swayed the verdict, what Harris's attorneys went into court and did was say, look, George Gage, who had been forced to act as his own lawyer, didn't raise his claim in exactly the right way. And so for this technical reason, you should affirm that conviction. It went to oral argument, and the judges were very concerned about that position, told the deputy to go back and talk to his supervisors to try to resolve the case, which was a signal to really get rid of it and do the right thing. And instead, Harris's office doubled down, and George Gage is currently 80 years old. He is serving a effective death in prison sentence. Then talks about body-worn cameras. She was asked by the California state legislature to support a bill to mandate all police officers wearing body-worn cameras, and she declined to do that. With respect to implicit bias training, that is important. What's also important, and I would say more important, is investigating officer-involved shootings. She was called upon by the legislature to do that, and once again, she declined. And then when you go down the list of the issues that we think about when we think about a progressive prosecutor, on every single one of those issues, she was on the wrong side. And in some cases, her opponents ran to her left. So for example, with marijuana legalization in her run for re-election as Attorney General, her opponent ran to legalize. She was against it. She's since changed her position now that the vast majority of the Democratic Party has moved in that direction. There are other examples as well. Her failure to support legislation that would reduce certain felonies to misdemeanors, going after parents criminally for having truant children. So there's a lengthy list of policy positions where
charge all the cops, not just some of them, not just here in Minneapolis, charge them in every city across America where our people are being murdered. Charge them everywhere. That's the bottom line.
This speech propelled TOAMIKA Mallory to the national stage. Understand, the things that Mallory said in this speech is direct contradiction to the behavior of Kamala Harris while Attorney General of California. She was opposed to the body cameras. She was opposed to explicit police training. She was opposed to holding the police accountable or the crime labs accountable for the misuse treatment of evidence. And yet she decided, TOAMIKA Mallory, in order to back Kamala Harris as vice president after the fact she had already acknowledged she had no faith in Joe Biden. It's time to hold your leaders accountable for their decisions.
No accountability.
Right. And it's like, okay,
I was, as you are rightly pointing out, the Attorney General of California for 2 terms, and I had a host of clients that I was obligated to defend and represent, and I couldn't fire my clients. And there were, unfortunately, situations that occurred where my clients took positions that were contrary to my beliefs. And it was an office of a lot of people who would do the work on a daily basis. And do I wish that sometimes they would have personally consulted me before they wrote the things that they wrote? Yes, I do. But the bottom line is the buck stops with me, and I take full responsibility for what my office did. But on that issue, I will tell you, I vehemently disagree. And in fact, no accountability.
Right. And it's like, okay,
Kamala Harris claimed to take accountability without accepting accountability. She continued to say someone else did this under her control, her command. And what I want us to understand is that Kamala Harris is Attorney General. Her employer, her client is the people of California who elected her to that position and the people of California who pay her salary.
No accountability.
Right. And it's like, okay,
important to do is to back up and talk about what the job of a prosecutor is. So many people think that it is about convicting people, and it is not. It's actually about doing justice. And that means that if you see something that is wrong, not just against your core principles, but violates, for example, the Equal Protection Clause or the Due Process Clause, you are required as the top prosecutor in your state to stand up and say, I won't enforce this law.
Which did Kamala Harris' response to this Haitian situation? Mm-hmm. Because I felt like her response was lacking. Mm-hmm. And I posted a response to challenge it, to say, okay, Trump has lowered the bar so low that just denouncing something that's evil seems heroic.
No accountability.
Right. And it's like, okay, it should be very easy to denounce that, but where are the actual solutions?
Past behavior is the best indication of future behavior.
The El Paso Times reported that a mounted Border Patrol agent was seen wielding a whip during an encounter with Haitian migrants. And
you talk in your book about voting, and you talk about you voted for Kamala Harris, and you talked about Biden and not really having any expectations of him as an old white man. Brother Tefpo posted a clip of Biden saying something I had never heard him say. And he was in a debate with somebody, and he was talking about Haiti, and he was talking about how he was getting criticized because he showed love to Bosnians who were immigrating into the States, but not to Haitians.
Haiti, is it because blacks are involved in Haiti? Blacks are what at stake in Haiti, and in Bosnia, they are Europeans, whites. If Haiti, a god-awful thing to say, if Haiti just quietly sunk into the Caribbean or rose up 300 feet, it wouldn't matter a whole lot in terms of our interests.
1994 crime bill, it did contribute to mass incarceration in our country.
The 1994 crime bill was signed by President Bill Clinton. This was a pretty significant bill at the time, and President Clinton and Senator Biden at the time were right that the bill was significant. Of funding to hire cops. 100,000 cops were funded. It was about $14 million at the time for community policing. The bill also enacted, but the most pernicious provision of the 1994 crime bill was its $12 billion that was authorized for states across the country that would enact what's called truth in sentencing laws. That funding literally paid states to increase the number of prison beds that they allocated for individuals convicted of violent crime in this country to serve 85% of their sentences behind bars. The reason that provision is so important, and the reason we're still talking about it today, is the federal government essentially subsidized states across the country to build more prisons. So 25 years later, the crime bill is being debated.
You stood up and used that tough on crime, phony rhetoric. That bill was a huge mistake.
There's no question that that crime bill contributed to America's mass incarceration problem.
1994 crime bill, we had a gigantic epidemic in America of violence, particularly in African American communities. The notion was overwhelmingly supported. It was supported by the Black Caucus in the United States Senate.
This is the issue with Black leaders. You have allowed other people to criminalize your children. Whites do not allow people to criminalize their children. When their children are hooked on heroin, they are not promoting the mass incarceration of their children. When your kids was trying to sell dope to come up out of poverty, you promoted with the white people the incarceration of your own children. This is not something that other people do. It's time you start to hold your leaders accountable for their actions, the people that they support. It's time to hold your leaders accountable. It's time to start judging your leaders, not by what they say, by what they actually do. If you do that, then you wouldn't have so much betrayal.